Oh, and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see Sam Fortier from the Washington Post. You can read his work at WashingtonPost.com. And he has a story on a notebook from the scouting combine. As you can see, he's there. I'm back in beautiful Berryville, Virginia. Anyways, one little reminder for you Gold members doing the private Zoom Thursday night, 7:30 Eastern time with the voice of the Commanders, Bram Weinstein. Join us there. Sam, first of all, thanks for joining me from beautiful Indianapolis. But I do want to go over like what, obviously I'm watching these press conferences and all that. You're there with it. What has been a big takeaway for you so far?
The fact that the Commanders officials, they say very little. They always reveal very little. They speak in general terms. Like when you ask Dan Quinn, what's a commander? They always talk about what commanders are, and he talks about enthusiasm and competitiveness. Those are, I think, are things that any football coach would say about any football player. But they have been much more specifically about what they want from pass rushers,
Right.
what their visions are for pass rushers. And Adam Peters, he was like, ideally they'd be 6'5" with 36-inch arms, and they'd, run 1.3 seconds in the 10-yard split of the 40-yard dash, which is kind of simulating their get off. And to me, like, it just feels very apparent that that is going to be an emphasis for the team this year. They have a very clear vision of what they want those guys to look like. What Adam Peters described is very rare.
I was going to say, let me say this. Nobody's running a 1.3. All right. So 'cause you had texted me, well, if they are, I haven't seen it, but maybe there is. So you had texted me like, hey, find out some guys in the get offs. So I looked at some of the free agent guys, right? And some guys that one guy he drafted in San Francisco, Nick Bosa, it was a 1.55. So the 1.3, like if you can find that, it must have been LT back in the day or something. I don't know. Unless you found that, I haven't found anything like that. Like Josh Sweat is a 1.55. Who else is a Jared Verse from last year was like a 1.55. So Nolan Smith, 1.52. So, anyways, there you go. Continue, please.
I appreciate you looking that up, and I was just gonna say, like, obviously those are extremely, that's a guy built in the
Right,
lab.
right.
But I do think that like them knowing that is interesting, and I do think it's valuable because when I'm thinking through free agent edge rushers in my head, like Josh Sweat, yes, he didn't run a 1.3, but I do think it's valuable to go and look and say like,
Right,
oh, okay, like Next Gen Stats says that Charles Amenahu from Kansas City,
right,
who I think could be a target, his get off is actually pretty bad compared
right.
to the other members of his class. And so, even though he is 6'5", even though he has 36-inch arms, Dan Quinn said the most important trait to him, the number one trait, was initial quickness. And just from the statistic, looking at the shorthand, it appears that Charles might not have that.
Right. And I noticed that too as well. But that's where, so sticking on the free agency, because here's the other part too. It doesn't mean they have to find this guy in free agency because I don't know that that guy exists in free agency. So I do want to talk about that. Like Josh Sweat, is he a guy? I think for all of us, we know how quiet Adam Peters is, right? And they're not going to sit there and say, we're interested in this guy. But he is a top free agent defensive end on the market. Is he a guy that you think should be pursued and at what cost?
Well, I do think that this is all a part of the domino effect, right? Like,
Right,
I asked him, I asked Adam at the press conference, do you have enough draft capital where if you wanted to
right,
make a significant trade, you felt like you could still build through the draft, which is what he said all along that he
right,
wants to do.
right,
And if you only have, I mean, I know 7 picks is a full allotment, but if you're going to acquire Myles Garrett and trade, you know, at least 2 draft picks, and they're going to be very valuable draft picks. And this year, you don't have as many picks in the middle rounds like you did last year in a draft that's considered to be pretty strong in the middle rounds. Are you willing to punt on what's considered to be a pretty strong draft, particularly at the position of need, edge rusher, defensive line in general? So, how aggressive are they with Josh Sweat? I think has to somewhat be informed by how aggressive will we be with Myles Garrett. because you're probably if you were to trade for him, and I know the Browns say they're not going to do that, but if you do acquire him and you give him a new deal, that's salary cap space that you don't want to commit to Josh Sweat. So it's a delicate game here. I think that they have to play.
Right. And I think the other problem with the Sweat and then with Myles Garrett, it's very possible that the Browns hold on to him until after June 1st because the cap hit is so much better for them. The savings, they don't get a savings if they do it now, but they get a savings after June 1st. So that could complicate your pursuit of somebody else. So I don't, you know what I mean? And I think that's an issue to or something to be considered too.
Totally. But I think if you're Adam Peters, if you're any team trying to trade for Myles Garrett, you have to like let the Browns know this and say, I
Of course.
know that the salary cap situation is going to be really tough, but look, like you have Deshaun Watson, like you're kind of tethered to an anchor anyway. Maximize your return by making the trade early. And Andrew Berry's decision, the Browns' decision, if they do trade him, which I think if you're the Browns, and obviously you know more about the Browns than I do, but it would seem that where they're currently at, they should trade Myles Garrett, and to maximize the return, they should trade him sooner than later. Maybe I'm just looking at it wrong from afar, but to me, strategically, it makes sense for the Haslams to eat this money and try to like, if they want to build a winning football team, maximize the return on assets and start building for the future once you can get out of Deshaun's contract.
Right. And I think the hard part is so there it's not the best situation as it rarely is in that with that team, but you have a staff that has to win now. But if so, they need to hold on to them, but you really need to blow it up and start over. So it's a listen, these kind of mixes only end one way. And it's very, like I wonder if so that's why I wonder, like, can you wait? How long can you wait to see if you can get Myles Garrett? And because if you think like, hey, you know what, they're still not budging, it's a draft, you got to take a guy, you got to sign a guy, and then you find out at the trade deadline he's available because maybe they hold, who knows how long they hold on to him. But I will say this, as we tape on February 26th, of course they can harden their position. There's no ramifications right now if you move or don't move them, right? So, but I do wonder how much. But would you, let's say, take Myles Garrett out of the equation? Would you pay a Josh Sweat more than 20 million a year, knowing what he does?
I mean, that is the going rate
Right. Yeah.
for a premier edge rusher. I'm not saying he's, in that top 10, but I think he's a very good edge rusher. He has a great get off. I think he's good against the run. I think it's difficult sometimes. I've only watched a little bit of him, but it's
Right.
kind of hard sometimes to isolate him from the supreme talent around him, especially on the inside. Um, and you go back and watch, some of his earlier stuff, which I'm planning to do when I get home from Indianapolis, and say, and you
Are you
say,
going to watch all of his plays going back to high school?
"Hey, man, you can make fun of me for working hard as much as you want."
I love it that you did that. You've got to understand. Shout out, Mrs. Fortier. I like that your son works hard. I always tease him about it though, because I appreciate it. Anyways, go ahead.
It's funny, man. I've had a couple people in Indianapolis say similar things to me, like, "Oh, you got to watch all the play." Like it's like, it's funny. So I mean, look, like there's always the danger of overpaying a guy that came off his best career year,
Right.
right? So it's I'm personally fascinated. Like, do you pay him more than 20 million a year? Because when you reach free agency as an NFL player, your leverage is maxed out. Like this is the most you're ever going to be able to cash in, and so Josh Sweat is. I would not be surprised to see him take the best deal. You want to set your family up, and I know he's made money, but like I think he has a chance to have a really huge payday here. And it's just who is willing to give him that because I do think edge rusher is a need around the league.
For sure. And I think he's gonna get paid. And to me, what it is, it's a combo of run and pass rush. Like they just need somebody who's at a more consistent level in both areas combined, right? It can't be one or the other. If you can get like that kind of guy, and I've had people tell me he's not elite, he's very good, but that's a lot, but we'll see. And then because what's the alternative? And what?
So I was gonna say, and then you can make that argument. That's what the salary cap's for.
Right. And here's the other part. By I think we both agree, like John Allen will not most likely be here next year. So now you're freeing up that space to now do something more with it, whether it's a trade, whether or maybe a move like this. If you figure, because like the thing you keep hearing too is that you kind of look at last year as a model, as a guide, right? But Frankie Louvu was coming off a good year in Carolina. It's not like he was bad and suddenly good this year. He had a good year, right? So, and then he ascended to another level here. But it's not like I mean, he was a good player for the Panthers last year. So you can find a guy like that. But the difference is he was a good player on a bad team versus Sweat, who's really had a really good year, but he's next to you got all these guys next to you who are pretty damn good themselves. So you have to weigh like where is he really at? But 1.55 get off.
The question that I have, kind of in a macro level for how the Commanders approach free agency is last year when they're, really starting their rebuild from the ground up, you give a lot of 1 year deals out to guys, prove it, let's
Right.
see how it goes. I'm curious because they have so few players under contract. I think it's 46 or 47. It's one of the lowest
46.
numbers in the league. Are you willing to give out more 2 or 3 year deals? If you re-signed Jeremy Chin and you liked what he did and you want to play him down near the box, do you give him a 2 year deal this year or a 3 year deal? Or does he find someone who's willing to pay more than you're willing to on the open market, which I think is possible as well? So I'm curious on what time horizon they look at a lot of these guys because you're in year two. Do you want to set yourself up if you do a bunch of 1 year deals again? And then who knows how many draft picks you have or don't have? Like, depending on trades. And I think, Debo Samuel is another guy that like I think is a potential trade target.
Correct.
But if you're trading guys, you're giving up picks. And so how do you balance like if you just keep doing a lot of 1 year deals and you don't have draft picks, then I think it starts to become a little rickety. You want to
Right. Right.
build a solid foundation for the future, which obviously they know they're going to prioritize doing that. But I'm curious how they'll do it.
And I think that's a good point that the 1 year deals with a loss of draft cap because they had a lot of draft picks last year. Now they can make some moves to acquire some more. And like if I'm them, maybe you trade back a little bit in the first round or trade back a little bit to pick up more second and third round picks because there's a glut of talent, cornerbacks, interior defensive linemen, guard tackle types, I think I said cornerbacks, running backs, like areas that you would think that they would want to address this offseason with young talent could be there for them if you add more there. And maybe then it gives you the flexibility to take a sixth or seventh round pick if you wanted to, or maybe a fifth round pick. I don't know what it would take to get Debo, but probably a day 3 pick. And if you get something for Allen now, you know what I mean? So there's a way to recoup and kind of, reshuffle the equation here.
There is, and I think that's going to be key because people forget, like in San Francisco, they made all those trades and they,
Right.
signed all those guys. They went up and missed on Trey Lance, but they still had picks. And people forget that the reason they were able to do that is because they did a lot of trading around. They traded back. They got a ton of comp picks for diverse hires with other
Mhm.
teams. Like NFL owners were complaining to the league office because the 49ers were getting so many picks for Saleh and Martin Mayhew and other guys. And so like that was a huge part of San Francisco acquiring all that talent and making all the moves that they made. And so Adam Peters has to find out a way to like keep the cupboard full if you're going to be aggressive and try to acquire premier talent.
And I do think going back to what I said, like if you think, seems like most people would think like there's not a lot of high end talent in this draft, but there's a glut from here to all the way over here. So a pick in the third round might not be far off from what you might get in the end of the first. That's why I say like, could you do something like that if you're not end up giving away that pick to Cleveland or whatever? And the best thing for them might be if they don't make the trade with Garrett before the draft, if they were in on it, you use this pick, you shuffle back, then you get more, then you can trade for him later on. I got it all figured out, Sam. I got the blueprint. But seriously, like that allows you to keep building this way. But do you think, I mean, again, being there, like the other thing that they talked about, and Peter has reiterated this, his love or his certainly definitely including Marshawn Lattimore for next year. So people who keep wondering about him, like he's not going anywhere. And how does, what do you think about that? And how does that affect, you think, the free agent market for corner for this team?
It's fascinating to me that people keep suggesting or speculating that he will not be here
Right.
because at every turn, Adam Peters has said, we're looking forward to having him next year. He didn't come into a great situation. We're looking forward to having him after a full season. There's no question that his play was poor and he lost his composure and he cost his team. And it was a really, really bad first impression. But I think that like they believe that he can turn it around. They believe that that they can get him where he needs to be. And so to me, the question that we talked about with Dan Quinn today is like, okay, who is going to be playing across from him? Is it going to be Mikey Sanders still, who's still
Right.
outside, even though you drafted him playing the slot, but even he handled it well? Or are you going to go get another outside guy? The reason, remember, they traded for Lattimore, Adam Peters said, was because they looked at the draft
Yeah.
class, they looked at the free agent class,
Yeah.
and they didn't love what they saw.
Right.
I don't expect Benjamin St-Juste to be back across
Right.
from Marshawn Lattimore, but there is a it's not exactly clear what the better solution is. Um, I think if they traded back and they got a couple mid-round picks, you could take a corner. Although corner, my understanding is corner is not as deep. It's not as front end. There's not as many good like potential plug and play as rookies that you had maybe last year, a couple years ago. So I'm curious how I think they could end up doing what they did last year, which is sign guys like Noah or Michael Davis and just try to figure it out, patchwork it. But certainly it's not a great position to be in.
It's not, but I do think there are a couple corners that could tempt them because they're good. They have length, which Quinn loves, and they are good press man corners. So I think they're in the draft. There are a couple there. Will they be in that sweet spot to get one? I don't know. So it's going to be hard because there may not be a lot of them, but they are there. It's just a matter of will they be in position to get one. So what about defensive tackle? Because you wrote about that in your notebook today too. We know with John Allen that you're going to have to replace something. Is Milton Williams a guy that you go, hey, this is the guy, or is he going to be like Sweat, where you have to wonder? And if not, do you have anybody that you've kind of looked at that you kind of like?
Nolan Williams, I think, like when I was watching before the NFC title game, I was like, wow, like I know they rotate their dudes. I know that like they're put in really good situations, but I was impressed. And I think that like he's the type of guy who could be a mid-market in that 4 to 10 million or 4 to 12 million dollar range, and you like that signing for a couple of years. I mean, he's maybe he gets more money than I expect, but I think he's proven he's good in a rotation. So
Right.
if you think to yourself, oh, okay, like Johnny Newton, Deron Payne, Milt, like that's a very good. And maybe Milt Williams says, "Oh, I want a chance to play more. I want a chance to be, a guy inside." I could totally see him saying that. But if you're Washington, I think you want to be competitive with him because he kind of fits what you've seen, and he can do. He's good against or at least he has appeared to be good against the run and good
Correct.
rushing the passer.
Right. And I think that's going to be something that they have, because I think that's the big thing, because what we've seen from Quinn's defenses over the years, the emphasis is more on getting after the passer. And so I think you said last thing, do you see a swing at receiver, and or do you see more of a trade, or do you see him waiting to see like if Christian Kirk becomes available? And I know you got to go. Your agent told me you got to run after this.
I think that a swing at receiver. I'm not totally convinced that T. Higgins is even going to hit free
Me
agency to
either.
hit kind of the big name off top. I do think that like a Cooper Cup or a Debo Samuel, if those guys, if it made sense, I think that those guys could definitely be in play. Like today we asked Dan Quinn, what do you want from offensive skill players? What's your vision? And he just talked about being aggressive,
Right.
about attacking.
Attacking.
And like I looked at JP Finley after the scrum and he was like, I heard Debo in that answer. And when you talk about aggressive, attacking, physicality, like as a receiver, like that's what you think of. And we obviously know from this season how important blocking is for receivers, how important versatility is. I mean, I know there's some questions about where Debo's at, his health, but he's the type of guy that fits that vision. Adam Peters knows him very well. I think that like it just makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that there the question is just like logistically, what's it take?
And I agree with that. And I will say in the very last thing on that, because I do, you got to go. But with Quinn, even though they don't say a whole lot, he dropped a lot of breadcrumbs about Jaden Daniels last year, a lot. And when you go back, you're like, oh, boom, 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 boom. And I think along the way, you kind of figure it. So you do have to pay attention to the traits and the things they like. And then the next part is, well, what do you like about this player? And if he says this and it matches that, there you go. But I do think I do think Debo fits in that description as well. So we'll see what happens. Sam, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking time out from there, and I will see you soon. Thanks, man.
So much for having me, Keim. See ya.